Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. Today, we are talking about, is happiness relative? Meaning, does it mean different things for different people? So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to the relativeness of happiness?
So I think it brings me back to something I've touched on a lot, which is first just like figuring out a definition. So in one sense, yes, the way that people talk about happiness is different for each one, just because sometimes people mean different things.
True.
But then I think there is also sort of this shared idea of happiness either being attached to like an emotional high or
Mhm.
some sort of like purposeful high, right? Like
Mhm.
those are the buckets that like generally when I'm seeing people talk about happiness, that's where it falls into. But I'd be curious what some of your initial thoughts are on, is happiness relative and different for people?
Yeah, I think it is relative and different for people for the most part, but I think it's the shared idea I think most people would have, maybe not everyone, was that everybody wants happiness or everyone is striving for happiness to some extent. But relative could be, and I think for even myself, I could see my happiness varies by degrees. Like for me, sometimes just having a cup of coffee for the day could bring me a lot of happiness and joy. But there's other things that celebrating my birthday is a higher level of happiness than that. But both things bring me happiness. And I guess it kind of depends on like the context of what is going on in my life too, because some days I'm like not even thinking about how enjoyable my coffee is, and other days it's like, yeah, I just really need this right now. So it does depend, but then there's other people that I think you agree with, because we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I think for some people, happiness is like a thing that is like, oh, once you're happy, you should always be going for happiness, versus for me, happiness is like a fluctuating emotion that, is never going to be a constant state of being, because that would be very unhuman, in my opinion, to just expect that you're going to be happy all the time. So I think me not having that expectation actually allows me to appreciate the happy moments even more.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really useful in terms of the shared parts, which is like happiness, if it means anything at all, is something that people desire, right? Like it's something that people actively want.
Right.
And then I think what changes drastically is sort of like what methods you use to get there. And then the other piece is like how people sort of evaluate happiness matters a lot. Sort of like you were just saying,
Right.
is like the way that you expect to sometimes feel unhappy and other times feel happy. Like I feel like that evaluation itself influences your happiness. So I feel like sort of the way that you like choose to evaluate your experiences and how desirable they are for you is sort of like part of the equation for what creates happiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe for some people, happiness is like something that, oh, I have to be constantly doing something new and exciting to achieve happiness. So I have to keep like pushing myself further and further, which I think, to some degree has brought me some happiness when I've strived for something in my life and achieved that goal. But at the same time, I find like, you know, what's helped bring more happiness in my life is having appreciation and gratitude for the things already going well in my life, and not seeing it as like boring or dull, or just it's like, oh, that's just life. I think having appreciation for what is has enhanced my happiness in a lot of ways. And I don't know if that's something that everyone can relate to.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to sort of frame this out.
Mm,
I feel like there are a bucket of things that generally make people happier, but they definitely don't work for everyone,
right.
right? Like most people who
Mhm.
cultivate some sort of gratitude practice
Mhm.
feel happier, but
Right.
there are for sure people out there who are not practicing gratitude in any sort of intentional way or even in any natural way and
Yeah.
still feeling like happy enough, still feeling good and positive and
Right.
whatever else. So I think you're onto something in terms of like the specific what components
Mhm.
that an individual needs to feel happy are not the same per person for sure.
Absolutely.
And even stuff that generally works for almost everyone does not work for everyone. So I think it's about finding sort of this like bucket of things that happens to work for you. And another piece that I kind of want to get at is I feel like sometimes conversations around happiness turn into binary
Yeah.
where it's either like, oh, if I do this I'm happy and if this I'm not. But like you said, when you're talking about like your birthday versus having a cup of coffee, like I feel like it's all on a scale of just
Right.
like how happy or unhappy are you.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I feel like there are like these practices or things you can do to make yourself a little more happy a little more of the time.
Mhm.
But it's when people, like you're talking about, get stuck in this idea of like I need to be happy or all the
Right.
time. Like sometimes I feel like they get anchored at a point on the scale that's so high that
Mhm.
it's an impossible expectation to meet.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that a lot. More so, I see people when they're in their lows or sad or depressed, they're feeling like, well, I got to get out of this. This is not
Mm.
okay. This is not acceptable. I got to be happy. This is, and then they beat themselves up about not being able to quite get there. And I think that kind of is self-defeating in a way, and it's not probably going to help you be happier. I mean, it maybe help motivate you to take some actions to be happier, but I think there has to be at least some acceptance in that, like, being sad is also a part of life as well as being happy. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference of just like, wallowing for several months in sadness versus just like, never giving yourself permission to feel that emotion. I think that's a little different.
Yeah, it leads into something, and I'd be curious about your thoughts on this,
Yeah.
but it leads into sort of like I feel like one thing that is different in the way that people define happiness
Mhm.
is sort of where that set point is, because I feel like a lot of people who've done a lot of work are able to say that they're happy a lot more of the time, but they may not mean the same thing that someone who is frustrated that they aren't happy is
Mhm.
saying. So by that I mean like let's
Mhm.
say that I'll use my own example. I used to feel like really miserable and depressed like a lot of the time.
Mhm.
And now when I have those feelings, I'm so much better at accepting and managing them and diffusing them and sitting with them and all the different tactics and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I would say that I'm a lot happier, and that's the way that I would describe it to people.
Mhm.
And even during some of those moments, I can still say that like I'm happy, even though I don't feel good overall. And
Mhm.
I almost wonder if like that's part of the distinction for people is like sometimes what I would call happiness, or certain points that I would call happiness, other people with different definitions would be like, I'm feeling content, or I'm feeling okay, or I'm feeling,
Mhm.
like the different labeling.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that some people have such a hard time capturing happiness. But I'd be curious what you think about like sort of that idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point you made because I think the labeling, and I think we've talked about this in a different, like, the language we use is all relative too, and content for one person could be happy for another person. And so content seems like if you could see happiness on a spectrum, like this is happy, this is sad. And like content is like on past the middle neutral ground, but slightly above 50%, I guess, into the happiness range. And I guess I do kind of see it on a scale because I'm like, what would, because for some people, me drinking my coffee could be like, this is a content kind of thing. But there are moments where it is like content. It's like 55% happiness versus like if I've been like going all day, all week long, and I'm exhausted, and this is the first time I get to like sit down and take a break and a breather and enjoy my coffee, that would be like a 90 to me. Like, it depends on the context too. So language can definitely vary person to person. And I think in any case, it's like if you're interacting with someone and they're like, oh, I'm content, and you're like, oh, they're barely happy, or they really happy, then it's just a matter of communication. Like we always go back to, it's like trying to understand what in their world and their context happiness or contentment means.
Yeah, I have another thing that I'm curious on your thoughts on, which is in the same sort of realm. Like, I, for example, don't experience on my scale excitement. Like that emotion doesn't go that high. And I'm curious if you think for people that their happiness scales sort of differ, which is to say that like the happiest I'm capable of being is more or less compared to like the happiest, the highest level of like that particular emotion for you or to whoever else.
So are you saying you feel like you don't get excited that often, or that's like separate from the happiness spectrum?
So when I see, that's sort of an example of just like a different emotion, or like a related emotion. But like when I see other people get really excited, right? The way that they experience that emotion visibly, right? Obviously, I'm not them. I don't know what it actually feels like for them. But like, I rarely, if ever, am able to like match that level of excitement. Like that emotion at that intensity just doesn't come to me very often, if at all, if ever. But like some of the ways that I've seen people excited, like I genuinely don't know if I've ever experienced that same level of excitement. So I'd be curious how you feel about that, like as applied to the happiness, sort of same, because we've been talking about it as on a scale.
Yeah, I think in that context, it really is like each person has their own individual scale, and it's like your 90% happy could be like expressive wise, like someone's 50% expressiveness, and that goes in like, it could be cultural differences. My husband is like from, his heritage is Italian, so they're just way more expressive and like loud about it. And then he's always calling me like deadpan, which I don't really see, but I guess in comparison to him, yeah, that's absolutely the case in many respects. But I have known myself to like, there have been instances in my life where I have been like over the top, like screaming, excited, happy, but it really, it takes more effort, I think. Something really has to like amp me up to get to that degree. It's possible, I think, in my opinion. But I rarely show it, so I guess.
So as a follow-up to that, I'm just curious, let's take expression out of the equation and just talk about like feeling. I'm curious if you think that like and we can apply it to all emotions, but we're talking about happiness. But like, do you think the scales actually differ for people? And the reason I bring it up, I'll give you a second to think about it. But the reason I bring it up is when I think about unhappiness, like it just seems to me that like some people in my life are capable of feeling such a deep and like awful unhappiness that other people in my life, if I take like the top and the bottom of the tier, like the scales don't seem to match up to me. And I would have to imagine it goes it like not just in the negative direction. But that's what I'm curious about your thoughts on.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that, because I do know people that tend to like get in much deeper like lows than myself, and I guess it's yeah, everyone's scale is a little bit different, and I'm just kind of in relation to myself. I mean, I've gone through phases in my life where my emotions have been really like up and down. Lately it's been a little more consistent, which I actually am appreciating and enjoying. I don't think I would say I'm like the happiest I've ever been, but I'm really like enjoying and loving my life for the most part. And I'd say I'm relatively happy most of the time, which I appreciate. But I think it really varies because it's like, I think it's like dependent on the person, but it's also dependent on like where they are in life. Because again, like I said, I've been through stages of my life where I've been like really roller coastering in my emotions based on like what was going on in my life or hormonal changes or things like that. So I could say that, that person might have more highs and lows, but potentially they could like even out if their life evens out, I guess, supposedly. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. Like when I think about my past, for
Mhm.
example, there are lows that I don't see how I could possibly get into ever again, just
Mhm.
because the way that I think now is different.
Yeah.
Like it would really take I mean, I would just have to like forget some of the knowledge I have around
Mhm.
like how to manage my experiences to be in those positions ever again. So I mean, I think that makes sense. That sort of your life circumstance makes a big difference. Another thing that I was thinking of is like I do feel fairly confident on the individual emotional scale that different
Mhm.
people feel different emotions at different intensities.
Yeah.
I'm much less confident on the happiness scale just because happiness is a less it's a more nebulous concept, right? It's
Mhm.
not like strictly an emotion. You can speak about it that way. Like that can be a definition that you use, but not everyone does.
Mhm.
So it's also interesting to me just to think about like, since it's sort of this more intangible feeling, like just if it's the same for everyone, just kind of what the basis of the question is.
Mhm.
Not really anything else to like add to that, but to me, it's just an interesting concept since we don't have any like internal measurement tools to sort of figure out where different people are.
Yeah. Yeah, they do have like in psychology, like one of like the measures that sometimes I've given my patients is like the PHQ-9, which is kind of like a measure more a measure of depression, really. But I guess it's like, oh, can you reverse that? A measure of happiness. And it's like relative to the last 2 weeks. It's like based on your entire life. And so it's like how you've been feeling over the last 2 weeks. And obviously that's going to vary from person to person. Because it's like, what if you just had a loved one die in the last 2 weeks? That's going to change your scale significantly. Um, or had like a major victory or win of some sort, that's going to change it significantly. So, yeah, I keep going back to context. It really makes the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that those sort of tests or questionnaires are sort of the best we can do right
Right.
now to try to suss this out, but it's all self-report. So like,
Right.
there's no way of knowing how strong or different
Mhm.
any of these like feelings or emotions or whatever actually is,
Right.
which I guess is actually the answer to the question. Like
Right. Like strongly
it,
agree, strongly disagree.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much impossible to know if there are actual differences in experience unless we come up with some other
Mhm.
magical tool for like feeling and experiencing other people's actual lives. But I think there's enough overlap that happiness is mostly consistent between people.
Yeah, definitely. But I think you brought up a really good point before, which I kind of wanted to expand upon is that uh, the fact that I've we've both done like a lot of personal growth and development. So me reaching to certain lows seems almost like impossible given like the tools and the skill sets I've built over the years. Um, but so it's, and I also think it's just like the frequency and the severity is just never going to get to that degree. Um, or at least the length, or it's like, I've had tragedies happen, and it brought me into a pretty low place. But I knew, you know, one thing that kind of helped me get out of it is just knowing that this isn't going to be forever. I'm not going to be depressed forever. It's just like, yeah, this is part of the process, kind of accepting it and allowing it to be, and doing the work I needed to heal, and getting the support I needed to heal and move forward. And yeah.
Yeah, I feel like having sort of an understanding, or just allowing space for what the ups and downs of life, basically the unexpected events, and not just that, but the time to get back into the swing of things, right? Because I feel like that's one thing that I've not done particularly well in the past, is being like, cool, I got through this event, and then like 3 weeks later being like, I still don't feel good. And I'm like, I don't always give myself space and time for that. I'm just like, I should be better now. What's going on here? But having some more of those, just like structured expectations and tools to understand what's realistic, I feel like helps a lot, makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Like I was just remembering when I broke up with my college boyfriend, I didn't have a lot of these tools, and I just kind of like suppressed it, and would just like pretend everything was fine, and just go to work and just be like, yeah, I'm cool and nothing's bothering me. And then I would end up crying every night before bed, like for several months, and just not really like deal with it in the way that I wouldn't deal with it now. I think I would just give myself permission to feel what I'm feeling through the day, and I would be more open and vulnerable, and share with people. And that, I think, helps me, I know for me, in my healing process, and being able to move through those emotions and get to the other side.
Yeah, you talking about sort of the progression that you went through made me realize another thing that's sort of relative in the happiness realm, which is how well equipped you feel to move yourself on the scale.
Right.
Because I feel like my quality of life and my it's weird because it's like kind of a circle, right? But like as I've felt more confident in my ability to alter my happiness has increased. And like
totally.
the bottom of the scale has sort of like drifted further and further away from where I regularly reach.
Yeah.
And like I've seen it in other people too. Sort of having an understanding of how to move yourself on that scale makes you happier, or having no idea what to do. Like a lot of people I've seen are unhappy and don't know how to do anything to influence their happiness. Then they're even more unhappy. So I think that's another thing that's relative but learnable. Like that might be the only thing that we've talked about today that you have a lot of influence over.
Yeah. It is like, that's a big thing that is relative. And I think when you, even if you're in a low, but you're confident in your capability of moving through it and moving past it, it's that in itself is empowering to a person, versus if you don't know how to do that, then you're like I'm stuck, or you're feeling helpless. And that's also just generally, I think something that helplessness kind of mindset is something that's more common in people with depression and struggling to get out of those depressive episodes. So, learning the skills can definitely make the difference.
Yeah, I'll say even within the last few days, I had a day that I was just starting to feel like down in a way that in the past, without tools or understanding, I would have just given up, or just like laid there, whatever. Just had like a slow, lazy day. But I knew, and I know because I've done this enough times, that I was like, great, I don't feel good right now. I'm gonna go do all the stuff that I know that I like need to do. I still don't feel good. Cool, but like I'm gonna go take a walk outside. I'm gonna go meditate. I'm gonna go make sure that like I have enough calories, because sometimes I don't eat enough. And all those things to like get myself back on track. And that instance, it doesn't always work, but that instance I was able to like go from like, oh, today's trending in a bad way, I don't feel good, I'm not gonna be happy, to like, to again, not like, oh, I'm ecstatic, but sort
Right.
of back to this like contentment baseline that's like a little bit higher than neutral.
Yeah.
And for me, that was awesome. Like
Yeah.
knowing that I have that skill and ability
Right.
compared to where I used to be in life is, like you said, so empowering.
Absolutely. And it's like I get that when you're in a low state. I just want to make this point for people in those low moments to know that like it might be the last thing you want to do. But I mean, I think it's okay to give yourself permission to like lay in bed if for a few hours or a few days if that's what you really feel like you need. But then knowing like, okay, these are the steps that help me get out of this state. Exercise, meditation, connecting with others makes the difference. And even though I'm like, I do not feel like it at all, it's like, I know once I get in started, it's going to feel good and I'll probably want to continue it. And I'll feel better on the other side. So it's like, you kind of have to like get over that I don't feel like it thing sometimes, which is challenging in those moments. But the more you do it, the more you understand that, like, I don't have to listen to that little voice that says, I don't want to. Just listen to the other voice that says, like, this is going to make you feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. When I have those days, I don't always win, but
Yeah.
The days that I do, it's because I made an effort to like fight through whatever those feelings are to do the stuff that I know works at least
Right.
some of the time, if not most of the time.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any final points you wanted to make before we wrap up?
Yeah, the last thing, and kind of already said this, but even if happiness is relative in terms of the size of the scale or
Right.
where your baseline is or whatever else, taking sort of dedicated action can help you move up the scale or increase your ability to move up the scale. And you may not be able to change, whatever your genetic baseline is, but it doesn't matter if it's relative, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are still things that can be done to sort of increase your happiness, even if it doesn't put you at 100% all the time.
Yeah.
Incremental improvements are also useful.
Yeah, totally. And I do think it's like, I think a baseline potentially for some people can change. Like I would say it has changed for myself, just from like the skill set and the tools that I've developed over the years. So just keep that in mind for everyone. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in this week. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. And if you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.